Welcome back to the Run Fast podcast, episode 42. Solo today. It's going to be short and sweet, but I wanted to touch on some of the things I've been thinking about lately. I had a coaching call this week with a really nice young guy who is quite a heavy athlete. When I say heavy, muscular, powerful athlete. He's 230 pounds and has some impressive numbers in squat, deadlift, bench press, and so forth. And he reached out to me on Reddit, to be honest, about helping him with some Hyrox training. So we jumped on a call and, it was just what was a 10 or 15 minute call turned into about an hour. And it was a really interesting call. And he was very knowledgeable in the fitness space and clearly had a great understanding of his own body and his own capabilities. And he wanted to potentially do a Hyrox and improve his running. And I think in today's space, this hybrid athlete is becoming quite popular. I do believe hybrid athletes have been around for a very long time. If I think back when I played Australian rules football when I was younger, I was probably 7 or 8 kilos, 15, 16 pounds heavier than I am now. I could still run a reasonably good 10K time, and I had, an okay bench press and squat myself. So, and a lot of other athletes which were much more impressive than I was, could run, mid 30-minute 10K times, 35 minutes, and had some big squats and bench press as well. And, dips. I recall one football club that I went to as a pre-season. The dip record was about 45 dips or 50 dips. It's pretty impressive numbers for guys that can still run a decent 10K, a decent 800, by the way, as well, and a decent 100-meter sprint. So the term hybrid is new in terms of the fitness world, but the training and the actual hybrid athlete has been around for a very long time. I think it just all falls under this fitness umbrella. But I do like it. I think it's a good way to depict a space we're moving into. And I think there's been a few athletes, Nick Bear, of Bear Performance leading the way, a big guy that's run an impressive sub 3 hour marathon. Anyway, during this coaching call, we were chatting about, getting back into running. He's a 30-year-old guy, good genetics, obviously, and he's a lean 230. He's a big guy, and he has run 10Ks. It's a slow 10Ks, and he wants to improve that, but it's a big shift in his mindset. And I think, he's a big, strong guy, and he wants to go out and actually muscle through some of these runs and improve quickly. And I did say to him, the one thing we need to do as, athletes is sometimes put our ego to the side. And we've just got to go back to this long, slow running. And I heard somebody say the other day, which I thought was a really good point, that, strength athletes, your strength gains can actually come quite quickly. And genetically, looking at this particular guy, his strength gains would come very quickly. He's genetically built for that sort of strength sport. But endurance running and longer running, you don't necessarily, some athletes do, but not everyone makes these gains as quickly. And it just takes time. Your body needs to recondition to this. And the longer running, the recovery is something I'm even finding myself after sprinting for 20 odd years and then having a little bit of time out from any sort of competitive sport, spending a lot of time in the mountain skiing, that my soreness after running these longer runs, 8, 9, 10K runs, I'm actually sore for a few days, yet if I go back out and I actually do some speed work and some faster work, it comes back to me very quickly, and I'm nowhere near as sore for as long. If I'm doing very intense speed work, I'm still sore, really sore hamstrings that get you straight away. So I think we really need to adjust our mindset, and I think that's in most cases with anything that we take up, we just want things so quickly. I used to say to my athletes all the time that it's not Nescafe coffee. I don't know if anyone else has Nescafe coffee around the world, but that instant coffee, which is terrible. We just add water to it and we get instant coffee. And so many things in life are like that today. And I've been a culprit of it, that I wanted things so quickly. But I think in training and in sport, I've always been able to see the bigger picture and plan longer. And work to that backwards plan. Anyway, I'm looking forward to working with this young guy and helping him out over the next few months. And I said to him, we'll break a week up into 3 or 4 days running. We'll see how his body copes. Given his age, he may recover quite quickly. Who knows? And we'll work on these longer, slow, easy days. But I said to him, don't be shy of when you start to get a bit fatigued, or when you hit a hill, or if there's some steeper sort of runs, or whatever it may be, to walk, to bring your heart rate back down, and to walk a little bit, and to find that comfortable RPE where you can actually just sit in that zone, and okay, I could travel for a fair amount of time like this. And I said to him, at the moment, even put the distance side apart, and any sort of speed to the side, and just think about running for time. It's all about time on your feet. And it's one of the things, a couple of years ago when I started to run again, that my physio, who's an ultra runner, said to me straight away, first thing he sort of advised me, don't worry about running distance or running speed at the moment, just time on feet. Just go out and get some miles under your belt, get some time under your belt. If you walk up the hills, and I still do that. I went out and I ran, I think, 8Ks yesterday, and so I could run that little bit further and not fatigue. Every time I got to a slight incline, I just took that little bit of time to walk up it, let my heart rate settle down, and I started to run again. And I've got up today feeling so much better, as opposed to when I try and push up those hills and my heart rate's elevated and I haven't recovered. So I think it's a big lesson to learn. So that'll be an interesting one, just to see how I go. I just wanted to touch on coaching as well, and I reflect back on when I coached. And we always had this discussion at training and around coaching being part art, part science. I personally don't have a science background, but I spent a lot of years coaching and observing other coaches, reading a lot about other coaches, read a lot of material, have done many coaching courses and so forth, but I don't have the absolute science that, some of these really, really successful coaches around the world have today. But I had some success as a coach over the years with my sprinters, and I put a lot of it down to having the buy-in of the athlete. And for me, this was really important. By the time I finished coaching, most of my athletes, and one of them's gone off to be a very good coach himself, and one of the other athletes is, somewhat retired, but still trains, still works out really heavy. They knew as much as I did. And I felt really proud that I've been able to impart so much information to them and teach them so much, and basically do a complete brain dump over these years. It was very difficult for me to stay in front of them anymore. And one of them actually had a bit more science, a bit of a sports science background than I did. So he sort of understood some of these fundamentals. But what was interesting, he would always still call me up, and he would, once we parted ways, and I stopped coaching and he sort of retired, but he was still training. He was writing his own programs, but he'd still always check in with me and say, what do you think about this? And he still does. He'll call me up and say, oh, I can't break through my squat barrier at the moment. I can't do more than 4 reps at this particular weight. What are your thoughts? And sometimes it's just having somebody to give you the confidence and say, yes, that session's good. And sometimes it's even to have somebody pull you back when you're overtraining. But as an athlete, it's really difficult to coach yourself, I believe. I'm sure some people do it. But I think having somebody to pull you back every now and then and say, look, you're just doing a little bit too much. And I'm looking at some of these athletes' programs online at the moment, and I'm not saying I have the answers, by the way, but even some of the Hyrox programs, I just wonder whether these athletes, because it's such a new sport and we're trying to really figure out the best way to train for it. I understand CrossFit's been around for some time, but there's not as much running in CrossFit. So I know the DECA events have some amount of running, and I'm not that familiar with them, so I can't really talk to those. But I think some of these Hyrox athletes may be overtraining. I think some of the absolute longer miles that they're doing may just be too much. I did listen to one Hyrox athlete the other week, and I thought, yeah, for me, and again, I was gravitating to that particular person because it resonated with my thinking, but he's come from a track background or a middle distance track background, an extremely good runner. I think he's run 15 minutes or just over 15 minutes, 15:30 or something for a 5K. I might be wrong there, but it was an extremely good time. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. and he's also a running coach and now moved into Hyrox, and he's got he's placed second or third in a few events already. And someone asked him the question about what's the optimum distance, for a Hyrox athlete in terms of volume of miles per week to run. And his answer was really in line with my thoughts. So hence I gravitated towards him, and I understand that we have a bias when someone mentally aligns with us. But his thoughts was around 50 kilometers per week. He thought was optimum. There's some athletes he knew that were doing 80, 90, 100 Ks a week. He felt it was too much. So do I personally. And he felt the absolute bare minimum you need to be running to be a good, to be competitive in Hyrox. Not saying the elite level, but let's call it competitive time, somewhere between, a minute 10, an hour 10 and an hour 20. He said the minimum or the baseline would be 30 Ks a week. The level you should be aiming for is about 50. And if you could get up to 60 or 70, you're probably getting into that more elite athlete sort of range, and you've got to make sure that your recovery and so forth is on point. And I tend to agree with him. And this is where a coach comes into it. I think some of these athletes I'm seeing online that self-coach, that they might be overdoing it. They're trying to increase their speed for the event, but sometimes you just need that third-party person to pull you back. And going back to when I was coaching, the athletes knowing as much as I did, and they could probably write all the programs, to be honest. It was, and I had this conversation with them. I said, you actually don't need me anymore. And their comments were, I just like turning up to training and you've taken care of everything. You just tell me what to do. And they would obviously push back and say, look, that session doesn't really work for me. We would always sit down leading up to a major event and map out the best training sessions in that last 6 weeks. The one thing I'm a big, big believer in is, we used to have this term in sprint training, there's always particular sessions that bring you on the most. And I would always ask the guys, what are those sessions that you feel once you've achieved those sessions, and we call them a marker session, that once you've achieved that session, it brings you on. For me, one of my favourite sessions leading up to any sort of major racing as a 400-metre runner was 3 200s with a 6-minute and an 8-minute rest. And they were at about 95 to 97, probably 97% 200s. And if I could get through that session after a good warm-up, run my 3 2s, first one off 6 minutes, second one off 8 minutes, and hit this particular time, I always knew, okay, my body's ready. It's responded really well. It's ready to go. So we had these particular sessions that we would love to do. And that's, that coach-athlete combination, I suppose, or that relationship that you have with your athlete. Knowing when to pull them back, knowing when to push them. There's other times when your athlete's got a little bit more in them, but they're just, mentally just not on that night, and you've got to be able to push your athlete, but also knowing really when you're seeing that fatigued and being able to pull them back, because you've got that type of athlete that is happy to keep training and pushing himself, really hard. So, but I think the art and the science part, the art part definitely is knowing that athlete. But I think what's really important is to have the athlete buy in. If your athlete doesn't believe in your program or have trust in you or buy into the process, I think you've got real trouble. And I was very lucky that I had just a small group of guys that performed really well, but they all bought heavily into the program. Now, it probably wasn't the best program. They may have been able to go somewhere else to another coach and perform much better. However, that if the other coach may have had a better program, but would they have had the strong buy-in that I was able to achieve with these athletes because they just trusted in the process? So I think that's a little bit of a nuance that we don't always really take a lot of notice of, and it's not always true, by the way, either. But I think it's just important. It was important for me as a coach that, the athletes trusted the process and we got that absolute buy-in. So anyway, I just want to talk about those few sort of topics, the hybrid athlete. I just wonder whether some of these hybrid guys that are trying to compete in some of these events, particularly like Hyrox, it's the event that I'm sort of more focused on and following more at the moment and doing a little bit of coaching in, whether they're overtraining and they're doing too many miles. We'll find this out eventually. It is, obviously, you've got to be able to go. The best athletes in the world are doing it in 55 minutes, so you've still got to be able to go at a fairly high intensity for that period of time. I just wonder whether they're putting in too many running miles, yet to be proven. And secondly, I'm also seeing some of the tapers. I think some people are maybe going into an event with a little bit too much fatigue. They're not tapering enough. And again, we're an explosive sport. Our tapers, we would still keep the intensity up, but the volume would drop substantially. We would have a shakeout run on a Thursday if we were competing on a Saturday. The guys, very rarely, the sprinters would not do anything on a Friday, maybe go for a walk, do a little bit of light stretching. 800-meter runner, he would probably have a light run on a Friday. He was just mentally built that way, and physically he could cope with more volume. So I think that's one thing I'm seeing at the moment. Maybe there's a little bit too much volume in the taper week. I'm not sure. But anyway, this will all shake out eventually. The times are coming down substantially. It'll be interesting, this coaching call I had the other day. If this particular athlete does a Hyrox, how he goes, if we can get his running volume up. And I've also advised him, let's just aim for a 30K week. It's going to take some time. He's obviously, he can get to 10Ks at the moment, but he's probably only doing 10 or 15Ks an entire week. So he's, doubling his workload is a big increase. That's going to take some time. But anyway, just a couple of interesting things I wanted to touch on. Keep it short and sweet. Hope you've had a good week. My training week's been pretty good this week. Starting to feel quite good, getting some miles into my own legs, and double squat sessions this week to keep that strength up. That's starting to increase again. So anyway, as always, get after it and have a great week. Bye for now.